Hey everybody, it's Andrew, and I want to give one more shout out for Unfold Games Awards. As I mentioned in the previous shout out last episode, it's a game awards event you guys should definitely take advantage of. Again, I have $170,000 in funding and prizes, so a lot to be taken advantage of, and the entries are free. It's indie specific, indie only, which they define as, just as long as your team doesn't exceed 10 people in size, you're good to submit. So make sure you go to the site. It's unfoldgamesawards.com. Check out all the information and make sure that you're eligible and following all the rules and everything. They're sponsored by Intel, Unity, Pixelogic, and a bunch of others. And, the jurors are just comprised of amazing industry veterans from AAA, big content creators, and people in the media as well. So again, a great opportunity for anyone out there who's looking to submit their game. Just make sure you follow the rules and requirements in order to do so. And we're coming up on the deadline soon. It's March 15th, 2021. So make sure you get your game in before that date. And if for whatever reason you get this information late and the deadline has already met, just follow them along and make note of the site and go back to make sure you're ready to go next time that they have the event. And again, that's unfoldgamesawards.com. Check it out. You don't want to miss it. All right, guys, that's all I got for right now, and let's get to the show. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, along with Mustafa Price, the show's producer. And today, in episode 145, we're going to be talking about how to consistently maintain quality with Supergiant Games. Now, Supergiant Games has been praised for having a consistent and quality signature across their vast array of games. From the initial concept to communication and gameplay, we want to discuss their standard of quality and how the ideas behind some of these games grow to become a complete immersive experience. So that's what we're going to be talking about today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back, and today I have Mustafa with me. Mustafa, how's it going, buddy?
It is going exceptionally well, Andrew. Thank you for asking. And yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for asking. And we also have someone else that we're really happy and honored to have on the show. It is Greg from Supergiant Games. Greg, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We appreciate you making the time for us today. So before we get into it or anything, I'd love, for Greg to, please share a little bit more about what you do for Supergiant Games and anything else that you do in your personal life, like hobbies or just things that you do for fun when you're not working at Supergiant.
Yeah, I can start with the first set of questions first, because what I do for fun is probably a shorter list. So my title at Supergiant is creative director, but what I do is writing and narrative design, other aspects of design for our games, including Hades, Pyre, Transistor, and Bastion. So I've been part of the team just about from more or less from the very beginning. And we started with just 7 people in the Bastion days, so I got to wear a lot of different hats. I'm involved with other aspects of our games as well, from just the down to stuff like the marketing and working on our trailers and all sorts of stuff like that. But the like getting my hands dirty working on the stories is certainly one of my favorite parts of what I do, and something that keeps me well occupied during the several years or so that it takes us to make one of our games lately. Prior to that, I worked at 2K Games for about a year in the publishing department on a game called Spec Ops: The Line. And then prior to that, I worked at Electronic Arts on the Command and Conquer series, the real-time strategy game series, which is
yeah.
where I met Amir Rao and Gavin Simon, who are the co-founders of Supergiant. So I was a producer on Command and Conquer 3. That was my first job, and Amir was like a campaign level designer, and Gavin was an AI programmer slash designer. And we became friends, and a couple of years later, we were playing these games like Braid and Castle Crashers and Plants vs. Zombies and World of Goo. Those are the games I distinctly remember from around 2008, 2009 that were these like really inspiring examples of what independent games could be. They felt very personal. They were made by just a handful of people in each case, and that's when we started wondering, what could we do left more to our own devices. And in 2009, Amir and Gavin left their jobs, dropped everything, moved into Amir's dad's house, and started working on the game that became Bastion. And I joined them. Like the following year after my stint at 2K. It's a whole long story, but I had been commuting to Los Angeles for that job for about 2.5 years at that point from Northern California. So I had to kind of go back and kind of settle the rest of my life before I could kind of dive right into another high risk game development adventure. My background is in the gaming press, so I worked at GameSpot for about 10 years, which was like my first real job. I started as an intern and was editor-in-chief by the end of that time period. But yeah, I wanted to make games since I was a little kid, and finally got my shot in 2007. That's when I went to EA. So I've now been at Supergiant for like longer than I was at GameSpot, something like that. And we've made our 4 different games. All 7 of those people who were there from the Bastion days, we're all still together, though our team is closer to we're about 20 people now. So we've certainly grown a bit, but stayed on the smaller side, I would say.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of key. Being small is really key to how we do a lot of what we do. So we intend to stay relatively small like that.
Nice.
So that's, and in terms of what else I do, like for fun, I've always loved games. I try to play games that aren't the games I'm working on. I like to read a lot. We live in a relatively, there's like trees and stuff around here. We just go on walks and stuff, do outdoorsy kind of things. It's really nice to be able to kind of step away from my computer that way. And yeah, things like that. I don't have any super fancy hobbies to boast about. I don't like make sailing vessels with my bare hands or anything cool like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, but still, it's always good to have something. And I think the important part there is simply you're like, hey, look, we have great fun things to do. We can get outside and stuff, and just take that time to really decompress and unplug a bit, just so you can get out there. And honestly, simplicity in that way is sometimes all you need. So that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what kind of books do you read? Just anything in general, or?
I read more fiction than nonfiction. I should, reading is one of those things. Like, I think even the most voracious reader would probably say, they wish they could read even more. A nice excuse I have is that we have a couple of kids and we read to them before bed every night.
Nice.
So that if nothing else guarantees I'm reading something every single day. And I have them read stuff that's, that secretly, not so secretly, I also enjoy, right? Or things that either I want to reread from my childhood that I felt was like very inspiring to me at the time, want to share with my kids, or things that are like kind of blind spots for me that I always meant to get around to and now I have this chance or something like that. Like I read a bunch of the like Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels to my daughter, I guess last year, a year or two ago, and that's an example of like I'd always had an awareness of Discworld, but never really read the novels. So that was fun. So we bounce around across genres and but mostly fiction. Yeah,
That's awesome.
new and old.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's something I'm trying to do more of with my kids, but my wife especially. She got the illustrated version of the first Harry Potter. So that's always
cool.
fun. And again, like just I love your way you look at that, is like whether it's reading something that I would particularly enjoy or I'm reading something with my kids, I'm just always doing something. So great way to look at it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I love that you shared all that with us and everything, but we're going to go one step further by taking you into the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Q Box round, it's just a series of random questions that we're asking Greg here today, just to get to know him a little bit better. So, Greg, are you ready for the Q Box round?
I think so. Let's do it.
All right. Milkshakes or smoothies?
Ooh. My heart says milkshakes, but my brain and body type says smoothies. Although smoothies aren't that much healthier than milkshakes, honestly. Milkshakes taste better. Smoothies give the impression of being slightly healthier for you. So I think I would pick a smoothie for that reason, even though I would rather have the milkshake. Complicated answer.
Fair enough. A place you'd want to visit?
I was born in Moscow, but I was 2.5 or something when my family immigrated to the United States, and I'm the only member of my family who's never been back. So I have essentially no memory of it except for like these kind of dreamlike little snippets or something. So I would like to see Moscow sometime, I think. But second place for me is probably Ireland.
Okay.
I've always wanted to see Ireland.
Sweet. What's one thing that motivates you every day?
I think my love of games is kind of motivating in itself. Games have inspired me since I was a little kid. They've done a lot. I feel like they've done a lot for me. Like they've been there for me. When times were difficult, they've just been a constant in my life. So I've just always wanted to contribute something to them. But that's pretty abstract. That's like, it's weird to be inspired by like an abstract concept. But like I think, knowing how games are able to make me feel, knowing we have players out there who have been who have had like strong and lasting experiences with our games, that helps to keep me going. I remind myself of that, how much this stuff really means to people when it's done a certain way, and that helps me push through the kind of the downs and the ups and downs of game development.
Sweet. All right, what's the best breakfast food in your opinion?
The best breakfast food. Oof. It's like, this is another in the genre of the milkshake question.
Yep.
I think like pancakes / waffles are like really, really good. They're really good when I guess sometimes they can be like, when they're done well, they're amazing. But I also basically never ever have them. So maybe there's an aspect of like forbidden fruit there that I'm just like imagining times when I did have pancakes and waffles. But boy, yeah, they like, whenever, if we're getting breakfast somewhere back in the days when we could do that, I'm always drawn to the pancakes section and never order anything from there.
That's awesome. All right, one more before we ask our staple question, which is favorite animated movie.
All time. It's tough. I love, like, there's too many for me to pick one, right? Like I similar to games, I grew up really watching tons and tons of animation from Japan and this country and other countries. But I like lately, it's a bit of a generic pick, I guess. But lately, I would say like Princess Mononoke or something like that. I've like come back to that movie and appreciate it more and more, kind of with each viewing, and it's just kind of like I think kind of a masterclass, not just in animation quality, like traditional cell animation, but the aspects of the storytelling and characterizations I really admire.
Nice. I had a feeling you would say something from Ghibli, but
Yeah, it's a like admittedly it's some like 9 times out of 10 someone's gonna pick like Ghibli or Pixar or something, right?
Yeah.
And like I don't feel that bad because there's a reason they're considered some of the best
Yeah. Yep.
in the world. But I grew up watching like there's stuff like Akira and
Yes.
and like I grew up watching Macro. It was called Robotech in this country, but that was like a really formative. That was a show, not a movie. But then I eventually saw Macross the movie, and that was like very like formative for me as well. I still love it a lot.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah.
Sometime we should probably talk more because like you're living my childhood now of all these animes that I was so into. Like, just what was it? Saturday Anime on Sci-Fi Channel was amazing, and I'm gonna leave it at that. For anybody who likes sci-fi, those are some really good old flicks. I think it was what is it? Manga Corpse was the publisher or something on those. But anyways.
yeah, they put out a lot of good stuff.
All right, cool.
Sure.
And last but not least, what are you playing right now?
I am playing a game called Spiritfarer, which came out
Yes.
Last year and was on my list of games I was meaning to get to. Having worked on a game about the afterlife, I was interested in other points of view on what the afterlife could be like, and it is very much a game about that. It's just so it's been interesting it's quite a unique game in terms of how it's structured and what you do in it and so on, where you're shepherding the kind of getting to know these souls of the dead before finally whisking them off on their final journey. But then it's got this kind of more lighthearted tone to it for the most part, and really nice kind of 2D animation and the mechanics of like a 2D side scroller. You're kind of like running around and platforming, but without the constant danger that is often in 2D platformers. I also just got Little Nightmares 2. In fact, my son picked it up and he just plowed through the game, start to finish, just early morning to the end of the day. It was like super compelling. It reminds me a lot of Inside, from Playdead, which was a game I thought was like really just unbelievably good. But Playdead has only made two games. Takes them a really long time to make their games, understandably. So it's nice to play something kind of in that vein with a good kind of spooky atmosphere.
Awesome. Well, yeah, good answers there, and I love some of the dynamics with some of them too, especially when it came to milkshakes or smoothies. But nonetheless,
the inner conflict, you're really getting to know the true me,
right? And I'm sure in a lot of ways we can all relate. It's like but that's awesome. So yes, thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's get into it for the main reason why we're here, having this great conversation about how to consistently maintain quality. And Mustafa, I'm going to let you now take it from here because you prepared a really good kickoff question for Greg that's going to really start off this conversation. I'm really excited to have. So without further ado, Mustafa, take it away.
Yeah, and thank you so much for saying so, Andrew. Quick addendum. The milkshakes versus smoothies question is the main reason why we're here. This is kind of a secondary thing that we're also going to do. So the reason behind our kind of topic of choice here is that Supergiant is praised typically for a very consistent level of quality across, the games that you've made. So what we kind of want to discuss is how that standard of quality came to be and how that consistency is maintained. So the first question here, with the absolute hit that Hades has been, earning many Game of the Year nominations and winning quite a few as well, between the successes of games like Transistor and Bastion, we're starting to notice, that theme of level of quality. So what can you share kind of about the process and how this attributes to having that sort of common thread throughout Supergiant's various games?
Yeah. So thank you. First of all, Hades has succeeded on a different level from our past games, though it's one of the nicest compliments that we hear is that sense of consistency that you described, because that's important to us. Um, we work on one new game at a time, and they take us about 3 years to make, and it's a long time and it's a big part of your life, just the 3 years alone. And not only that, but the game that you worked on is going to, at least I feel this way, and it's true to my own experience. Each of these games, they stick with me like forever. So I have a very good incentive to do everything I can to try to make sure that they're as good as possible, because I don't want to like live with regrets about the thing I worked on. But of course, I'm just one person on the team, and the quality isn't up to any one person. It's all of us. So I think the through line, like the direct answer to your question, how do we maintain the quality through each title? The simple answer is the team has remained very stable over time. That's not to say no one has ever left the studio, and we have had folks move on, over, it's just going to happen over like a 12-year history or something like that as the team grows. But we've been really fortunate that all 7 of us who were there from the beginning, that we're all still there and working together. And we set an explicit goal of like wanting to stick together and keep making games together for as long as we can. So like the sustainability of how we work is really important to us, and the quality of our work is really important to us, and it comes from the individual creators that we have and their own sense for what the standard is. And we have a shared set of values about games. I think that is expressed through the work that we've done. Like I think, for as long as our team is anything like the team that it is today, where I just imagine we're always going to value the kind of like atmosphere and the world building and the kind of the way that the gameplay experience itself harmonizes with the storytelling. Like we're looking for ways to tell stories uniquely through the designs of our games. For as long as Darren Korb is our composer and audio director, I think like the music is always going to be an important part of our games. And, as long as Gen Z is our art director, like the artwork is going to be, have these like wonderfully imagined characters and things like that. So it's a testament to the talents, I think, of the people at Supergiant, and we often will say in our own words that like back to your inspiration question, we inspire each other as well. When like for someone like me, when I work with people like Darren and Jen, and I see the work that they're doing, it's a big motivator for me to also keep doing my best to do work that lives up to their work and so on. So when everybody feels that way, it creates a pretty good sort of perfect storm in which hopefully good quality can happen. And we're also, I think we're like, we try to be very honest about what we have and what its shortcomings and opportunities are and stuff like that. Like I think that we don't just sit around and compliment each other's work all day, right? Like we have we're critical of our own work. We think that giving feedback effectively is a really important skill as a game developer, and we try to give each other feedback in the right ways at the right times, so that we could keep get our games to the quality that we hope they could be at when we imagined them originally. But yeah, it's I think there's no. We've been really fortunate that you're I feel very fortunate to be here, like having you ask me this type of question, because like hitting a quality bar in game development is really, really difficult, because the quality bar is always going higher and higher with each passing year. So just because you made, just because we made Bastion, back in 2011 and it was well received, it was that didn't mean that, the game we would make after that could live up to the standards of, a few years later, and so on and so forth. So we have to keep learning and growing and improving to kind of keep up with the times as well, adding more sort of complexity to it. We can't just keep doing things the same way time after time. So that's a bunch of stuff, because it's a tough issue, and not something, we don't take for granted that quality will just happen on its own. It's something that you have to kind of claw at to achieve, I think.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I think it's such an incredible series of points that you've made, really, about the level of kind of almost, meticulous oversight that it takes as kind of a collective to really acknowledge what that quality bar is, and actively ensure that you're hitting it, rather than kind of passively hoping that through other things it will come together.
Right.
I want to really revisit what you mentioned about how being, constructively critical of your own work is a really valuable skill, because I would echo that. I would agree that that's a very important thing. And kind of for the benefit of our listeners, can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, primarily, what does, I guess, kind of the proper execution of that skill typically look like, at least in your experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that giving feedback effectively, I think above all requires having context, and that context can be as far-reaching as possible, really. But two really important aspects of it are, one is, what stage of development is the game in? Like, where is it at? What are the constraints? Is it very early? Is this like concept level feedback, or is the game, weeks away from shipping? Like, if the game is weeks away from shipping, if you want to utterly destroy, a developer to whom you're giving feedback, then like, you could be critical of it on like a foundational conceptual level of like, I don't know that this whole game concept is a good idea. It's like that is just going to, maybe that's what the developer needs to hear, but this is the other part of it, right? Like, it's valuable to know to whom, like who you are addressing with the feedback. The more that you can know about them, the more you can, like, the more effectively you can communicate with them, because you don't, you can, the way you may communicate with your close friend is different than the way you may communicate with like a with like someone at a different studio who you've never met before, right? Like we adjust our communication naturally. And the more you know the person, the more you can adjust your communication to to use language that is going to get through to that person. Like if you know the person well, you can communicate with them more effectively in many cases, just kind of broadly. So I think just knowing, so a really simple question I ask sometimes when other developers ask me for feedback is like, what stage of, like, where are you at in development? What type of feedback are you looking for? And that can cause them to be more introspective about, like, hey, we're 3 weeks away from shipping. The game is just about done. We're looking for, but having said that, any feedback right now is welcome because we're going to hear about it in reviews. But then if there's any small stuff that, that you found distracting or whatever, that's the kind of stuff we would really want to know about. Blah blah. That just knowing that type of information up front can help. And then I think the other thing is I always like to speak to the promise of a game, what it was doing, how it was working for me, what was going well about it, and then what parts of it, maybe didn't fit with the rest of that experience. So I think framing it in a constructive way, not like blowing smoke or anything, right? But just like coming at it from the perspective that things can always be better, and there's always a good idea, or not always, right? But there's very frequently a good idea at the heart of something that's just sort of trying to break free. Yeah, so that's a long-winded answer, but the short summary, like I said, is just trying not to give feedback blind and trying to be mindful of the stage of development the game is in, and the people who will be receiving the feedback, and sort of communicating with them accordingly in terms that will be constructive, because your goal as a feedback giver is to be constructive and to help to try to provide helpful feedback. Oh, one last thing I want to add is, I think we ask for this explicitly. Hades was developed in early access. We welcomed all sorts of feedback, but we said the feedback that we value the most is the player's personal experience. Like, when in doubt, just describe your experience. Say how you felt. Say what confused you. Say what you enjoyed. Say what you didn't enjoy. You don't need to speculate about what will other people do. You don't need to say, like, oh, I got what you were going for, but I'm worried that other people, may not understand this. I'm an experienced game player, so this wasn't difficult for me, but I worry it might be difficult for other people. Like, don't worry about that. Just say your own experience, because a developer should be gathering feedback from many different types of people, and if the game is too hard for certain types of people, they'll hear from those people. Like, you're not responsible to give feedback on behalf of people who are not yourself. So, but I find that often, like there's a temptation to make to generalize beyond one's personal experience when giving feedback, and I find that type of feedback can, while well intentioned, often can be misleading, I think.
Yeah, I want to say, Greg, that I loved how you talked about communication and feedback in that way, to a level where, yeah, constructive feedback is great. However, you within your team, it sounds like you break it down to certain specific levels, to the point where, like, no, like, really, like, let's dig into what this feedback is about. At what point in time are we receiving this feedback? How is it relevant to what we're doing? Because a lot of times I think developers, they look for this information, and at a very high level, it can be misleading to some ways because the feedback that you're getting might not be the feedback that you need. So it's really great to know that you guys have the system in place where, depending on where you are with development, you can be really focused on what that feedback is and what at what point in time and what really matters at that point in time. Because otherwise, I'm assuming anyways, it could put you on a different direction that you may not want to go in. And then the second part too with the players, I that's great because it's like at the end of the day, like you said, it's all about that player experience and really catering to that to the understanding of, because that's the part of the feedback that you probably don't get the most of unless you're like setting those expectations ahead of time.
Yeah, and it's and like I said, it's really the most valuable. Like and it's connected to the other thing I said. It's like, because players don't have as much context for the state of the project as the developers do naturally, right? Mm-hmm. So and this isn't just players, this is like, again, it could be a developer to developer playtest. Like there's a temptation to recommend solutions, like, but the solutions I think tend to best come from the development team as a result of hearing the personal feedback. So to give an example, it's like, oh, I found like I didn't know that I had a special move, like I played for 5 hours before I knew I could do this special move, and boy, it would have really changed my experience had I known that I had the special move available. Why don't you should teach the special move right from the beginning. So like that part of that's the part that I think is like less valuable than the initial feedback. The initial feedback of like, I didn't know I had this really cool special move until the 5 hour point. To a developer, they're like, okay, like either they might read that feedback and be like, good, we meant for this to be discoverable and we're okay with this being discovered 5 hours in. Right. Or they might go, oh my God, this is core to the gameplay, and it's like a failure of the tutorialization of the game that this did not come across. So we need to create a new scenario that introduces this move, blah, 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 blah. But like the solution can come from the team based on what they feel the game needs. Whereas like having the kind of suggestion box style feedback, I think it's tough because that's the kind of feedback when it's just suggestions and stuff that may not align with where the developer is taking the game, what resources they even have to make it, right? Like the suggestions may be totally out of scope for the team. The suggestions are still valuable because it's good to know what games create expectations when you play them, and it's good to know what players end up like, where a game leaves a player wanting, right? Like, oh, if only it had this, if only it had that. It's important for a developer to know about that stuff, because if your game has too many of these, like, if only it had this and that, it can be a disappointing game because it doesn't sort of deliver on the promise that it sets out to create. So it's as we can see here, I guess, like feedback giving is, I think, ultimately quite complicated to do it well, and it's a process we're always like learning and improving at, I think, because at especially like early on in development, when an idea is still like kind of nascent, it's still being formed, it's really easy for feedback to be crushing and to sort of stifle, like it's hard to make that judgment call of like, is this idea not yet fully realized, or is it an idea that, or should a different idea be pursued altogether? And that's something where like I don't have an answer to how to do that well. That's like our experience and instincts have to come into play there. But we do know that those early ideas, they're like little fledglings, right? They're like very vulnerable. So it's if an early idea has promise, we and people on team care about it a lot, we have to give it a chance. But knowing what a chance is, quote unquote, is important. And how many times do you sort of take a stab at something before you decide, okay, this isn't working? Like with a design idea, for example, like how many times do you try a certain mechanic or a prototype before you realize, okay, this isn't coming through, that we're really struggling with this. So I think we have pretty good instincts around that at this point, where we're willing to try something, a good couple of times at least before saying, okay, this has the feeling of a real struggle, and we know from past experience that when we're struggling this way, it means that there's probably a different solution here that would work better than the one that we're pursuing. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to try to take this in a little bit of a different direction now, where, because it's a good segue from what you were sharing just now too, about getting that feedback, getting that clear understanding of what that player experience is like. But aside from design and development, player immersion can go well beyond gameplay. So what was the evolution of serving your community like, and how integral has it been to maintaining that overall experience with Supergiant's brand?
You mean, how do you mean, as far, you talked about immersion and then
yes,
serving our community? Like, can you
sure.
elaborate more? Yeah.
So specifically, you can get player immersion in terms of playing the actual game, but then outside of just any of your games or anything like that, when you're serving your community as a whole, to the extent that you communicate with them and interact with them and everything, how has that been an integral part of what you guys do in maintaining that player experience, that fan experience is probably a better way of putting it, and maintaining that with Supergiant's brand?
Yeah, so how we communicate to our players and customers, essentially.
Yep.
That's been, so in a word, it's been really, really important from the start. Among my responsibilities that I didn't mention, I run our Twitter account myself, and have done that since the beginning, and that's grown from not existing to now we're close to 300,000 followers or something like that. So we're just shy of 300,000 followers on Twitter. So that comes with a certain amount of pressure, right? It's like anything you tweet out, a lot of people are going to see it. And that's only the people that it reaches directly, right? It can be retweeted and whatever and reach a bunch more people. And we have a Discord community that's grown. When did we start? I believe we launched our Discord in 2018. It was earlier the year that Hades was announced. And what are we up to now? We're
I think I checked it recently. You guys are right over 15,000, right?
We're over 60,000 members on Discord now.
On Discord. So just one channel I was looking at. Sorry.
Yeah. So So our Discord is pretty substantial too, for in a reasonable amount of time. We kind of we try to have the same values in communicating to our players that kind of our game. We try to be consistent, if nothing else. I think we just try to have a forthright and kind demeanor when it comes to our players and customers. We try not to we try to communicate only when we have something to say, as it were. We're pretty. I would describe us as pretty kind of straight-laced in our communication with our community. We don't if people want to meme it up, that's fine, but we don't typically participate in that ourselves. I think personally that it can be sort of, I don't know. I don't always think that when brands act like they're your buddy on Reddit, that it comes across the way that they hope. So we would rather just be direct, and we read every email that we get. We actively participate in our Discord, try to set simple rules around our community there. Of the first and foremost rule is to be kind, which is purposely a broad rule, but we think an intuitive rule as well. And we've kind of our ability to communicate with our players has sort of grown over time through these different channels. We also have like an email mailing list and that sort of thing, like, because we've had to, as you well know, it's hard for big developers, much less small developers, to like just get the word out about anything that they're working on. And we found, even if we've made like after Bastion, our first game did well enough for us to keep going and make a second game after that. A lot can happen in like 3 years between games, and just because you found an audience 3 years ago, it doesn't mean that they're all going to come back for the next thing you make. And I liken this to I have an analogy around like bands and music. Like you'll meet a friend of yours or you yourself. It's like you may have like a favorite album or something like that, but do you really know like the whole discography of that band? Like, do you know what's the latest thing that they put out? Like, I think it's very frequent that people have a favorite album, but like have no awareness that the artists have like continued to, create more great stuff that they might like or something like that. And I think it's similar with independent developers, that it's just it's a struggle. It's a challenge to make sure that to get the word out about what you're doing. So we've had to like go somewhat broad, between mailing lists and Discord and Twitter and all these kind of things to hopefully be able to reach our audience between games. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But the community building side of what we do is another like really important dimension in addition to like the game making itself.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. To add, sorry, Andrew, if you.
Nope, you're good.
So I was gonna say it's really like, and I'm kind of sitting over here mind blown at like the music comparison, because for us, I feel like it's like a completely different thing where, we've got this podcast around indie games, and so we are following developers and the things that they're doing. But when I think a little bit more in tune with like movies or other media that I perhaps enjoy without necessarily being as invested in, no, that's a really strong point. I think we're typically kind of prone to be much more invested in the product than kind of the brains and work.
Yeah. Or even it's even more like subtle than that, because you can watch movies are a great analogy. Also, there could be a whatever you see a movie, you're like, wow, like this director, this had this is an amazing, like whoever directed this, that was amazing or something like that. But you may not be aware of the next thing. Like, it's hard to like follow a director or something like that. Yeah. You have to really actively seek that out. And yeah, same with a band, like, whatever like even if you do love the creators and not just the product, it can still be difficult to actively follow the creators of something, because it is like an active process, to have to seek that information out, see what they're up to, and like that's just a lot, but sometimes you find out that like, oh, this director of this movie you loved, like they made 2 other movies since then, why haven't you watched those? Or they made a new thing on Netflix, why haven't you watched that, etc. And you might find out about that well after the fact. So, and I'm sure from the point of view of that director, they're like, damn it, like if only everyone who loved my past work could have been aware that I just released something new, because they're they probably gave the new thing everything they've got also.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say too is I definitely love that analogy too, because I think to some degree it can be hard for indie devs or any content creators, let's say, to understand that concept, or of like, hey, this is going great and what happened. And I mean, I think to your guys' to Supergiant's credit, in a way, it really comes back down to this overall philosophy of communication, and understanding that, like, that analogy, that concept of, hey, you know what? everybody's busy and everything else, it can be a real challenge, even if they're big fans of this product or several other products, to keep in line with that. So I think it's a good credit to you guys of just a way of standing out and having that open line of communication and using these channels effectively to keep people engaged. And because it's a hard thing to do and maintain on a regular basis over years, of course, let alone anything less than that, it still is. So I think that's probably like using that analogy is a good one for people to understand it, but it clearly you guys understand it, and through that communication allows you to really stand out better.
Yeah, thank you. Though to your point, it's just it's always something we have to sort of treat with give a lot of care and attention to, and just respect that aspect of the process. Like, we can never ever take for granted that just because we've made something that people have enjoyed in the past, that they will be automatically interested in what we make in the future. We know that is not true. We have to work at it every single time. And I do, like, for us, like, the marketing of our games it's a big concerted effort that we put a lot into, because it's essential to our games finding an audience. And this is even with the fact that we have made games that people have enjoyed in the past. So I recognize that is a big advantage. Like, we have you called me on the show based on our past work, right? So, like, our work does precede us and it helps, but it is not sufficient as a means of, like, promoting whatever we may want to do in the future. And, like, there's just so many good games always coming out that it's a real challenge to break through. And I'm glad that challenge exists, because it means that a lot has been done to, like, kind of democratize game development more than in years past when there were fewer games. But now, one of the consequences of the good thing that game development is more accessible than ever before is that there are tons more games, right? So marketing games, if the barrier to entry to development has decreased over time, with free tools and all sorts of stuff like that, I think, like, the marketing challenge has increased over time to some extent, at least for smaller developers.
Yeah. Well, like you said in the beginning, it's like you always have to find a way to raise that bar when the barrier to entry, that bar is always lowered.
Right. And there's just, like, extraordinarily talented developers all around the world, like, super motivated to make some incredible game, right? So it's like games have always been intimidating in that way. Like, there's always someone better than you out there, like, not just a little bit better, but way better than you. So what are you going to do? Like, what game are you making that kind of deserves to exist, has its own identity? How are you going to get the word out about it? Like, these have always been difficult questions, I think, and they're no more. Yeah. They're, like, they've not gotten any easier for me to answer over time. I could say that.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great segue, and Mustafa, if you want to take it with this in terms of, like, some ways to stand out, because yeah, I mean, there's clearly some things that you're doing that you can do that. So, Mustafa, what's one good question I know we have ready for Greg here about how to stand out?
Right, absolutely. So saturation in games is probably, like, one of our most regular topics on here, and it's something we try to incorporate frequently because, as you mentioned, it is one of the rising challenges of an increasingly accessible industry. And while that overall is a great thing, it does, of course, mean that devs kind of have to shift their perspective a little bit and kind of find new ways to approach these challenges. So what would you say are some concepts and inspirations that you as a team use to stay ahead of the curve and then also kind of craft these special and meaningful experiences for people?
Yeah, it's it is tough, in a word, because we first of all, I think we have grown. We have always, I think, intuitively always been comfortable with reconciling the art and the business of game development, and understanding that those things are not. They don't have to be in conflict. So if your goal is to make a video game that is sold for money, then there is a business component to what you are doing, and it doesn't need to be seen as like a dirty thing. It's just a reality, and like we need for our games to sell in order for us to be able to make more games, which is what we want to do. So it's very much a means to an end. We're making these things that ultimately people will have to pay money to get. In most cases, right? They could pirate them, but if everyone pirated them, we would be out of business, and so on. So we have to make something that people decide is worth their money. And that can be achieved by making something that has whatever, artistic merit, right? I think people are willing to pay for worthwhile experiences. And the nice thing about independent games is they're more affordable generally than like, whatever, the $60-$70 AAA games, especially once they go on, Steam fire sales and whatnot. So we try to make games that like speak. It has to start with what resonates with us as a team. We don't try to back solve from what are customers asking us for? What are they saying they want? Like, let's make that, because if you make something that is similar to something else, you're already taking a pretty big risk, because you either you have to make the best example of an existing game format, like an overwhelmingly superior example of that, or you have to make something that is sufficiently distinct. Take like a first-person shooter, for example. After the success of PUBG and Fortnite, right, there were many battle royale kind of also rans, and many of them, I'm sure us on this call, we have not even heard of many of them that came and went, right? Because it's easy to try to chase after like a trend when you see that there's like a big game type out there or something like that, but you have to make something, like I said, either it has to be overwhelmingly better than the best versions, or go do something different, find a different path. These days, one of the huge Steam hit these days is that game Valheim, which fits into one of those like popular Steam genres, right? It's like a survival crafting game, and like they're games like Rust and so on have paved the way. But I haven't played Valheim myself yet, but like there's a reason it's sitting at like a 96% positive Steam review rating. Like, it's, according to its players, it is like one of the best examples of the style of game that makes many smart improvements, feels better, looks better, etc., than a lot of games in this format. So that's an example of a game that just sort of powered through and did it better than a lot of other games were doing. But if you can't make a better game than Valheim, then watch out, making a survival crafting game, right? Because why should someone play your game instead of that game? So we just, I think that's part of the reason our games like even have like why we value like narrative and atmosphere. It's to give our games a sense of specificity. Because if you like strip away the atmosphere and the narrative layer, then our games become just more, at least in some cases, something like Bastion. It's just like you could very disparagingly call it like a mindless hack and slash game. like many others. But with the world building and the atmosphere and the storytelling, it gained its own distinct identity that then gave it a chance to stand out. So we're just always looking for something specific, and we're not doing it. We're not ever going for like originality for its own sake. It's just, again, in that effort, we play a lot of games ourselves. We're just like, we don't want to work on something that's like an inferior version of a game that we like. We want to make something with its own. So we use that term, its own identity. And I like to look back. When we can look back at our games and say, no one would have made this if we didn't make this. That tends to be a pretty good sign. It doesn't guarantee that the game will be a hit by any means. It doesn't guarantee that it'll get good reviews or whatever, but at least we can sort of rest assured that we made something distinctive that hopefully could create a positive experience for the players who do decide to take it up. And then that's a pretty good outcome. Bring something into being that can create a positive experience and wouldn't have existed if you didn't make it yourself. So I think we look for that quality while being mindful of like how we're more mindful now of just how to even let me or I can back up by way of to rephrase this part. Hades was the first game that we worked on that we planned from the start. Like our other games, from Bastion to Transistor to Pyre, each game was kind of like more experimental than the last, and we spent a lot of time in pre-production just figuring out what the heck we were doing. And then when the time came to start like marketing and promoting the game, we had to find the words to even describe what we were working on. And with Hades, and I was a big proponent of this myself, it's like, we're eventually going to have to market this thing. We're eventually going to have to say what it is. Why don't we try to come up with some of those terms immediately in expressing what the so-called vision of this game even is? Like, what are we going for? And if we can come up with something that sounds pretty good on paper, that's probably a pretty good starting point for the project. So Hades was like a more sort of cohesive idea than that of our previous games, and that's something that worked out very well for that game. So I think it's something we'll probably continue doing, is just trying to have a more articulate idea of what we want to work on from the beginning. That may, I'm not proposing that I don't think that's like something every developer should do. That's just something that has worked out well for us over the years of our like different sort of experimenting and prototyping and types of pre-production cycles on our games. Yeah, so that's a lot of thoughts on that subject, but it's obviously a very like, if anyone had the formula right for how to like stand out in a crowded market, like they would just do that over and over. It's just like, even if you think what it takes at a given time, chances are when you finish your next game, if you can even finish it, right? Like the whole world may be totally different, and like you're like you have to keep evolving your practices in this regard, because standards are always changing. It's back to that issue, like the fundamental challenge of game development, that the moment you feel anything resembling mastery, everything moves ahead, and you have to keep learning and keep improving.
Right. Well, the one key thing I got from all of that, which was extremely insightful and everything, was just simply when you said making sure it's its own identity. Because you can easily, any game out there is going to be derivative of something else, right?
Yeah,
I would say chances are, right? Because, and plus the extreme side, if it's so unique and different that then it could fall flat, or it could be amazing. Who knows? But I think the main point that you made is just having its own identity, and that way it's just like you said, through your Supergiant's process in terms of the story and design and all elements that are incorporated into your games. They stand alone because you you guys are very aware and in creating that it's its own identity. And
Yeah.
so I love that part. Mustafa, anything else that you wanted to add or comment on?
Yeah, I would just say I'm appreciative of the concept of like considering what hindsight's going to look like for your project, and really thinking about, looking back on it and how you're going to feel about it, kind
Yeah.
of looking back after the fact. Like I feel like that's something that I think especially when we're creatives and you're driven by so much passion, you kind of focus on the creation of something in the moment, and you think a lot about like what it's going to be when it's finished, but not so much what it's going to be 5, 10, 20 years after it's finished.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting angle, and something that could probably really help to amplify those feelings towards something. And I think it worked out because not for nothing, obviously speaking kind of presumptuously here, but like obviously in since launch we've seen a lot of the kind of impact of Hades, not just like for people who have played it, but kind of in the overall pop culture zeitgeist around discussing games. So it seems like that's going to work out from that angle.
I mean, it's the looking on games in hindsight thing is very important to me personally. Like I was saying, I was just talking about Bastion again as an example, right? Quite a bit. It's like that's a game we worked on literally. We shipped it 10 years ago. So yeah, it'll be 10 years old this year. So it's I think I said it before. I don't want to have any regrets about it. And it's not about like how the degree to which it succeeds. Well, it depends. Success is like measured in many different ways, if it can be measured at all. I think there are like there are abstract aspects of success that are really difficult to measure, such as how do you personally feel about your work. That can be really different from what numbers may tell you. And so that has to do with like, how like the entire development process potentially. It's like, did you, maybe you made the game of the year or something, but did you run yourself into the ground while doing so, or were you able to like maintain a more healthy pace or something like that? So it's seeking that balance is really, really important for us, since like I said, we want to be in it for the long haul. And just like not, it's not about it would be disingenuous to say like, oh, you must never compromise, because it's just you compromise all the time as a game developer. Like you're always having to make decisions about when to move on from something, when deciding that something is as good as you're probably going to be able to make it, even if it could ostensibly be better in some way. Like maybe if that other more extraordinarily talented developer out there worked on it instead of you. So like compromise is part of development, but it's making peace with it. It's making the like decisions that in your heart to be the right ones for the team, for the project. And if you can just do that consistently, then hopefully you can look back on your work with a degree of fondness, however it turns out. It's interesting because the degree of its success may like that isn't the main factor necessarily in how you as a developer might end up looking back on the project. I think that's something I learned myself, because having worked on these games that thankfully have been well regarded, but it's like it's just one part of how I feel about it when the sort of dust starts to settle, and what the reviews are and stuff like that. I care about all of it, to be clear. As a former game critic, I do really value reviews, and I do value like what players have to say and what the hindsight on it is, but it's just kind of one part of the equation.
It's awesome. And yeah, thank you for that additional insight too. I mean, just going into it and sharing that, basically that mindset that I think is important in defining what success is so important, because there's so many people out there, or this is with any industry, right? How much money am I making? Because to some degree, that's like, it's everybody's dream job or whatever, right? Whatever they're passionate about or doing, but looking at it, and this is something like I'm big and I'm a big follower of too, is like, how do you define success, and is it really just all come down to numbers? And I'm glad you said that, because I think some people can get really caught up in the numbers of things, whatever they are, and not look at how are things well balanced. How did like it make you feel like, and I think it gives not just you on a personal level, but it says a lot about your team and Supergiant too. Is like, that's like probably a big core philosophy, having that mindset. And I would like to shift that too, just to, as we start to close here, for just lessons learned. I mean, because, and maybe this is what I'm going to be asking you, what I just said, but you tell me. You guys have come a long way, like, Supergiant, and transitioned into a recognized icon basically for indie devs and players alike. So what would you guys say is the core value that Supergiant has followed, and why would you say that you dedicated so much attention around it?
Yeah, it's hard, similar to favorite animated movie. It may be hard to pick just one, but the number of the values that is really, really important to us isn't an enormous list. I'm trying to think of what's the one and only one. I think if I had to pick one, it is I'm still struggling. There's an inward facing one and there's an outward facing one, right? There's one that's with respect to how we make things, and one that's with respect to like what we make and its relationship to our players / customers. Customers being one of those like icky sounding words, yeah. But again, in the if you accept that the business and the art are not in conflict, then you must accept that your players are your customers. Like, they paid for something that you put out, and they're sort of like, they're entitled to at least the thing that you said you were going to give them. So, yep. I'm comfortable using that word, even though I acknowledge it has its kind of gross sounding connotation. The internally, like, it's all about us sticking together. The idea that we as a team are in this together, that we navigate the challenges and the conflicts that we run into together, and that recognizing that we're basically on this something that Amir, our studio director, who I mentioned before, he articulated well, the idea that we're on the same side of a problem. Creative conflict happens frequently at Supergiant, and I think if we all had kind of the same personality and outlook on things, our games would be way worse. They're born as a result of us having like a pretty different set of personalities on the team, different sets of interests and tastes, and so we give each other feedback. We kind of argue over stuff. But hopefully, again, in like a constructive way that leads us to a better result. But recognizing that we're like that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, as obvious as that sounds, it's really, really important to keep in mind. And our games are like, part of that is manifest in the fact that like our games are not, even though my title is like creative director or whatever, it's not like the games don't come from any one person. Like my job involves trying to like find the kind of connective tissue between disparate ideas. It's not to tell people what they should make. It's to like hopefully contribute to an environment where they feel creatively liberated to do the work that excites them the most, and then find ways to tie that all together. So if we can create this environment where everyone is fired up to do their best work and generally is on the same page about the trajectory of the project, then we're in a really good spot. And then we could have really honest conversation, give each other direct feedback about where things are going, how things are doing, and so on. And we could establish that like consistent quality bar. So, and then when it comes to our like our players and stuff, the thing that's always been important to me, I think to all of us, is this idea of creating games that have a chance of leaving a lasting and positive impression on players. Like we want, and that's hard to define, but we just want to create games. It's right on our website. It's like we want to make games that create, we say, spark your imagination like the games you played as a kid. But we think back to the games that inspired us when we were kids that we still think about, decades later. And what was it? What is it about those games that stuck with us forever? It's not necessarily that we remember those games, start to finish, but we remember moments. We remember like how they made us feel in certain events and so on. And just like trying to create games that have a chance of doing that for others. And that it's hard to achieve that. We don't ever know if we've achieved that until we like start getting feedback from people like for real. But at least we go for it. At least I could say we go for it. Like we're trying to create something that will result in a positive experience for people. And again, that sounds it sounds so obvious when I put it in words that way. I don't think it's like particularly special, but it's just knowing that games have quite a bit of power as a medium. They're powerful as an interactive storytelling medium, and trying to look for ways to like harness the specific power of the medium, or because if we just wanted to tell stories, there's more efficient ways of doing it. It could try and write a book or something. It's like a more straightforward way of telling a story than trying to create a whole video game. But there's magic in the unique properties of games and just trying to like tap into that in unique ways. But yeah, I think the team focus is the main. Oh, the last thing I should add about that, with regard to focusing on the team itself, we build games around our strengths as individuals. Those are the constraints. We don't come up with game ideas that we don't think we can execute. And that may seem really creatively constraining or stifling. It's like, oh, you're really limiting yourselves if it sounds like the definition of thinking inside the box of like, rather than outside of like, what can we make? But that's what we've done all along. It's like, what abilities do we have that we can build a game around? Like the quote unquote classic example of that for us is something like the voiceover in Bastion, which came from the fact that Amir and Darren know Logan Cunningham, who's been our principal voice actor in each of our games. Like if they didn't know Logan personally, I don't know that we would have pursued voiceover in Bastion at all. And yet when people experience Bastion, they assume, I think understandably, that the narration must have been like the central idea of that game of like, oh, it's going to be fully narrated. It's like that idea was not there at the beginning of that project. It was a means to an end of the other thing I was describing. So yeah, playing to our personal strengths, trying to keep improving, supporting each other as a team. That's been the single most important thing for us and our ability to stay together all this time. Yeah, and I think I want to add one last thing. It's like we were talking about success and numbers and stuff before. Again, like it's nice to have these other goals around success, but I think for many game developers, their goal is quite similar. Their basic goal is like the one that we've had all along, which is like to live to fight another day. Like your game has to do well enough to where you can afford to make another one after that. If this is what you love, then that is a really important goal for the game to sell well enough. But ideally, you can accomplish that in a way that is consistent with your artistic and personal goals, and you're not just hell bent on making the numbers happen. And I feel like your odds of achieving any numbers goal are going to be higher if you like are honest with yourself about your creative goals as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to come back to that too, because it's, and again with a lot of the things you shared today, a lot of this stuff, like you said, it sounds pretty obvious, but it really comes to, well, these things are obvious. Clearly, there's a much greater understanding that comes with these concepts, and that one in particular. I mean, to me, the way I interpreted it was simply, yes, these goals are important so you can achieve your dreams, so you can become sustainable. But that doesn't mean sell yourself out either, because then
Right.
you're going to fail at those things that you want to do. Basically stay true to yourself and keep on keeping on. But don't sell yourself out, because it won't get you there, even though it may feel like that could be the case.
Yeah. Or even if it does get you there, even if somehow it does, you're gonna have to live with it. And if you got into it because you love games and you just want to make games, like you don't want to have to compromise that deeply.
Right.
And we told ourselves this when we were working on Bastion. It's like I remember, and I continue to feel this is true. It's like I would rather, if we were very, like, each game we've worked on, at least for the first couple, it's like this may be, I personally approach each game as though it may very well be the last game I ever work on, for one reason or another, just circumstantially, because you never know. And so just it's really, with Bastion, we didn't know that we would be able to go on. So, but it made it very liberating to work on in some way, because it meant that we could just do our best with that game, be able to look back on we prioritized like being able to look back on our development experience fondly, being able to say, we made this game, true to our values, true to ourselves. This is the type of game that we could not have made, could not have even pitched had we stayed like at our like AAA jobs. And so whatever happens, like we're comfortable with that. We're fine with that, and we weren't that fearful of the outcome as a result, knowing that our odds of success were inherently slim. And then it went on to be successful and position us to make another game, and that was great. That ended up being kind of the icing on the cake, I guess. Like I think even if Bastion failed, but was like still the same game, I'm sure I would be like, have some coulda, woulda, shoulda type of thoughts of like, oh man, what if only, it had done better, my life might have been different or something like that. But I remember feeling good about that game before it came out. And that was really important to me. Like I would rather work on, that's to me it's the most, it's very, very important. Back to the thing I was saying, because it's just gonna stick with me either way. And I would rather making games is so difficult and so time consuming that it's just important to enjoy the process of it as much as possible, and not just be focused on the outcome. So finding some healthy balance between those things, I guess, which is always tough.
Yeah. Well said. I don't have anything else to comment to that. That was just perfect.
Thanks.
Of course. Well, I think that pretty much covers it then. But before, Mustafa, did you have anything else you want to share though? Before, because again, I can't say anything to that.
Yeah, so I know we're running a little long, but this is something that I think it was very important for me to at least mention. One of the reasons why, speaking for myself, it was so important, Greg, to have you on the show and to talk about kind of how we define success, how to maintain that consistency, and especially within the context of something like Hades, is because last year you guys were very vocal about your process as far as kind of that balance piece, that work-life balance, that maintaining a healthy culture within your team, and especially during a time where we were seeing a lot of that kind of negative discourse around the AAA space, around development practices for some incredibly like heavy hitter, super popular games. To see you guys kind of stand with them, when it came time for the nominations and the accolades and everything for last year, I think really told a very important story about how we can kind of, I guess for lack of better phrasing, stay the good guys in these stories and still, achieve these levels of success on that numbers side while creating things that are creative and meaningful and important to people, and maintaining, that healthy livelihood as much as is humanly possible, and keeping that balance and still, kind of maintaining the human facet of it. So that's a very multi-dimensional approach to making something so incredible in execution. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for that, and really highlight that, on our show as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think, as you know, from at least from stories I've worked on, I find that the idea of good guys versus bad guys, it's often more complicated than that. And the interview, like the source of the information about our studio culture is a 2019 interview that Amir and I gave to Kotaku at PAX that year, and that started making the rounds this fall, where we talked about our studio culture and some of what we've learned and the policies that we've instated. For what it's worth, one of the points I make there that I actually felt bad got lost in the shuffle is like, I personally don't think that a lot of what we do, and I said this earlier on the show, I don't think a lot of what we do would scale it works because our team size is small. We can be a bit idiosyncratic in our approach and like cater our studio, like cater our policies to the specific individuals that we have, because we're 20 people. We can do that. Like not everybody works the same way, and we don't have to be like we don't have to like require a super regimented way of working when it's 20 different people who have different preferences. But when you have like 500 or 1,000 people, you can't, like, it's a lot harder to cater to 500 or 1,000 people personally in that way. So I love AAA games as well as independent games. I think it's a minor miracle that any game ships, much less high quality ones. So I have a great deal of empathy, if nothing else. I have like admiration and empathy for so many game developers out there. I still play games regularly that astonish me, that whatever experience I have as a game developer, I still have no idea how they did what they did. I'm blown away by the work that they do. And I know that there's no shortcut to hard work in game development. Like hard work, there's just ultimately, like, to put in the fun, cool, interesting details into a game, it just requires doing more stuff than is strictly necessary, and you have to like create a development process and an environment in which that work can occur. And I appreciate that we're like I think we're still figuring out what is still figuring out the best way to do things ourselves. I guess I get a bit uncomfortable of us being sort of put on this pedestal of like all game companies should be this way. I actually don't think that, because if all game companies were like us, then you would just have a bunch of games exactly like Hades, and maybe that's fine, but I don't want to see AAA games go away or something like that, if that makes sense. I hope that other developers continue to learn and improve in their own development practices so they can find more sustainable ways of making the amazing games that they make, because I think everyone values everyone would at least say that they value the sustainability of the effort. Nobody wants to see their best their like talented teammates, burn out or anything like that. Like everybody is doing their best out there. So I hope that people can have empathy for the fact that it is just very hard for any studio of any size to remain competitive in this industry. And nobody, I don't think, in general anyway, just about every studio is going to set out with good intentions. It's just like reality happens and things get hard. So I'm glad that things have worked out well for us and that we've been able to stick together and learn from our various trials and tribulations. But it's by no means the case that we're now we get to like kick back. Oh, we've solved the problem of sustainability in game development. Like the point is that it is an active, difficult, ongoing process to figure out the best way to do that. It's never gotten. That's one of those things that I don't think has ever gotten easier, and I don't expect it ever will. So we'll keep doing our best, and I'm really glad that we have the support of so many players out there. But yeah, anyway, I think that's. I wanted to say a few words there about that like studio cultures are all different, and they're not like necessarily transferable in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I'm glad you defined that too, because I think sometimes people will naturally want to be like someone else. Like I see it all the time with devs looking into other devs that they respect and look up to. And well, I think emulation is great, but you can't always be like that, because you still, like we mentioned before, you have to be true to yourself. Because if you're acting like someone else, it's not being you.
And even if you are, we take inspiration from plenty of other studios, past and present. But it's also important to be aware that you're emulating an ideal. It's just like when you meet someone who's like charismatic and well dressed and well put together and whatever, and like, oh, I wish I could be more like this person. It's like you don't necessarily know what that person is like just from appearances, and like they have their own struggles. They just may be better at covering them up and so on. So like exactly. we did the like part of why we wanted to do we have the no clip documentary about the making of Hades. It's like, if we're going to make this early access game, let's show I hope it is like honest about that process, but it's like let's show the process warts and all, because game development is just often it's not very glamorous the vast majority of the time. It's just kind of like you're slogging through this stuff and just trying to make something work at all, and then when it works out, it's a miracle. So yeah, so like you said, it's important for studios to find their own identity and not try to emulate other studios out there too much, because those studios already exist and have their own identity already. So but there's so much room, despite all the games coming out, there's so much room for more new voices and points of view in game development. I think that's like part of what I was trying to say. Like I don't think that I have to imagine that we don't it would be sad if like we at Supergiant had discovered the perfect solution, because it doesn't feel it rarely feels perfect in practice. There has to be, so we ourselves think that there must often be a better way than, and we're just always just trying to find it as like an active practice. It doesn't mean that we will, but yeah. So that's the part that I would advocate for, rather than, you know, trying to do things exactly the way people think that we do them or something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that as well. I appreciate the dimension that adds to what I was mentioning before, you know, and I think that kind of consistent striving to improve and pave your own way is really part of what I was getting at with kind of the human aspect of it, you know, and maintaining that perspective. I think you make an excellent point about kind of the nature of scaling and the way that can impact things. But I definitely would agree that like the most important thing, you know, is that like everyone who wants to go into this field, I think, has something that they believe they can contribute that maybe either isn't necessarily there, or maybe they're not really kind of hearing their voice in that way. So
yeah,
100% would echo that, you know, kind of maintaining your own identity as you're going on.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, before we wrap this up, Greg, please share with us, like, if there's any information you'd like to share about Supergiants, where people can get your games, if there's a way that you can reach out, how to find your Discord, anything you'd like to share, please, you know, let us know on how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, we're just Supergiant Games in various places, Discord, and actually we're just Supergiant on Discord, but we're Supergiant Games everywhere else on Twitter, stuff like that. And I'm my personal Twitter is just my last name, Kasavan. So yeah, you can find me there if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts about any of our stuff. Our games are on various consoles and PC. Hope you enjoy them if you get a chance to check them out.
Yeah, and we definitely highly recommend that too. Again, thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on here.
Hey everyone, and thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. A special thanks to Taisuke Kimura for creating the show's theme and Donnie Wilson for the logo design. If you enjoy and value the content, you can support us by visiting our Patreon, which is patreon.com/IGM podcast, and select a tier that meets your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com/the number of this episode. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. So if you're looking for helpful marketing content or marketing plan template for your current game, then please visit rengenmarketing.com. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.